So what makes Fibonacci unique for the method calls is the way the chain of calls works, right? For factorial, it was a fairly straightforward call. We had so if we had 5 factorial, right, that would call 4 factorial, which would call 3 factorial, which would call 2 factorial, which would call 1 factorial. And let's just assume that 1 factorial is our base case, right? And the chain stops there. So we've got this linear number of calls here, right? Whereas for Fibonacci, we've got something radically different with the way we've coded it, by the way. Now, there are smarter ways to code it. And this is one of the cases where actually coding it iteratively makes more sense a bit. So fib of 5, that requires us to calculate fib of 4 and fib of 3. Okay? So notice we've got, instead of one line, we've got 2 branches here. Now, fib of 4 requires us to calculate fib of 3 and fib of 2. And fib of 3 requires us to calculate fib of 2 and fib of 1, right? And fib of 2, that's a base case, right? These are all base cases at that point. And then, but over here, so we solved this side. Now over here, we have to recalculate fib of 3, even though we've already calculated it over here, because there's no kind of crosstalk between the branches, right? It does not remember that we just solved fib of 3. So we have to recalculate fib of 3, which means we have to do fib of 2, fib of 1. So now, if I decided that I didn't want to calculate the fib of 5, I actually wanted to calculate the 6th Fibonacci number, fib of 6. I also would have to recalculate the entire fib 4 branch, right? I'd have to recalculate this entire branch over here. So that means that basically essentially, each time I add n goes up by 1, I double the amount of computation I have to do, right? Because you have 2 sides, and each of those sides has 2 sides, and so on and so forth. Right? The bigger this gets, the closer it looks like to us actually doubling. So at some point, like, that means like if fib of 48 takes 15 seconds for you, fib of 49 is going to take 30 seconds for you. And if fib of 49 takes 30 seconds to you, then fib of 50 will take a full minute after that, and so on and so forth. And doubling goes up very fast. Now, this generally doesn't happen with recursive functions, but the reason it happens is because we make 2 recursive calls. We make 2 recursive calls, both of which calculate stuff that has already been calculated, right? So the runtime for this, since we are doubling, it is not O of n squared. It's actually the other way around. It's an exponential function. It is O of 2 to the nth power. And what that means is that every time n goes up by 1, the runtime roughly doubles, right? N goes up by 1, the amount of work we have to do doubles. So this is a terrible Fibonacci function. I don't know why it's often used as the first recursive method. Mainly because it's an elegant way of looking at it and an elegant way of presenting the problem. But the runtime is terrible. Now, there's a couple ways to get around this, as I mentioned. The first way is So the first way was doing it iteratively, abandon recursion to get recursion altogether, and there will be a quiz in lab, and I'll go ahead to tell you that this is a question on there, that anything that can be done recursively can be done iteratively. Any problem you can do recursively can be done iteratively. So there's no problem that can only be solved by recursion. So remember that, because that's going to end up on a quiz. The second thing to know is, so the second way to solve stuff, the 2 other ways to solve stuff are things that I won't test you on, but they're good to know about. Second way is a technique that I was talking about called memoization. And what memoization is a way of basically, well, if the problem is I have to redo all the work, then what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create an array of size n, right, for each of the n Fibonacci numbers I need to calculate. And whenever I calculate a number, I'm going to put that value inside the array, right? So I check the array. So every time I ask what is the fib of 4? Well, if index 4 in the array is occupied, if there's a value there, I just retrieve it and return it, Okay, if it's empty, well then I do the whole recursive call to calculate it. Then when I get it back, I save it in there and then return it upstream, right? So the entire point there is that I either pass as an argument an array along so that every method has access to it, right? Because remember, when you're passing an array, you're not copying the contents, you're copying the memory location. So you're not, copying this giant array over and over again. You're just copying where you find it. Or you can keep that array as a static variable, wherever. But either way works. The third way to do it is a technique called tail recursion, which I'm not going to go over, but it is gone over in your slides, and I don't test over it, so I don't really want to waste too much time going over it. But it's another technique where you pass your answer around in the arguments, and you pass the and the arguments you set themselves do the calculation. It's actually kind of very elegant. So those are ways to get around it, but those will result in a linear time solution for calculating this as opposed to a exponential time. So it's amazing how basically that we can get from an exponential time algorithm to a linear time algorithm. Now, what I want you to do, and if you have not been able to finish this, just raise your hand so I can help you finish it. What I want everybody to do is to upload their copy of what they've done onto the assignments. So that's how I know that you've done this, right? Upload your copy there, and you'll get checked off, and you'll get full credit for it, right? So this is just simply, again, a participation kind of grade base for this. And then I will come over to you to check that. We will do something similar in the next lecture on Wednesday to go over Towers of Hanoi, okay? So again, for the rest of the lecture, we will go over, I want to be able to go over where you are and talk about this. And basically just see where you are in the work, help you out, check you off if you need to be checked off. The other thing I want to mention for the week, for the recursion homework, right, I'm going to adjust the due dates based on how much time people need, because some people are saying, oh my God, I can't complete these in the time required. With the recursion homework, I did some videos last night, and I posted them last night that go over specifically the content in the homework. So just throwing that out there.